Yeah. So one thing I want to mention is my dad actually never went into a care facility. So he stayed in my parents' home for the entirety of his disease. And so COVID threw a real wrench in having caregivers come to the house. And it was twofold because we were afraid my dad would get COVID, but we were actually more afraid that my mother would get COVID because she has an autoimmune disease and she couldn't get vaccinated for it. So we were constantly on edge of, is the caregiver going to show up today? And are they going to be willing to wear a mask? And then, sometimes they would get COVID themselves and they'd have to bail out. So it was this constant, like, who's going to take care of dad? Who's going to help mom? Does she have someone overnight? It was like really stressful on top of trying to manage it, for myself with my kids in my own home. And then it was like, well, we can't take dad to the doctor because he can't really go. So there was just a lot of, and then it was like this question of, do we go there and spend time because we know time is limited and time is short, or do we stay home and, worry about physical health rather than everyone's mental and emotional health of being together? And then when you're trying to FaceTime with a person who has dementia or Alzheimer's, it's very complicated. I thought my dad was confused most of the time because my sisters and I have two sisters. We'd all get on FaceTime together. And my dad was probably like, I don't know what's happening. I hear three voices. They're all the same. It just added this level of complication that I almost felt was just unfair to our journey. Though as time progressed, I realized it was actually a blessing because I realized my dad was not missing out on anything in life because nobody was doing anything. Nobody was going anywhere. And it ended up probably being good timing.
Welcome to the All's Authors podcast. We're so glad you found us. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'm Mary Ann Shuko, a registered nurse, author, and dementia daughter.
And I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a licensed educational psychologist, dementia daughter, Al's author, and coach focused on the sandwich generation. Please join us for bi-weekly episodes with our authors as we talk about their dementia journeys, sharing intimate details and painfully obtained knowledge to help others currently on that path.
We hope these stories offer you comfort and support as we strive to break the silence and stigma surrounding a dementia diagnosis.
May one of our authors speak to your experience.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi, I'm Anne of All's Authors. When I was caring for my mother with dementia, I searched long and hard for memoirs and personal stories about other caregivers' experiences. I wanted to know not just how other people survived, but how they thrived. Unfortunately, at the time, there was not much available. That's why we created the bookstore at allsauthors.com. Now, busy caregivers can easily browse for just the right resource to guide them on their journey. Books are categorized by relationship and type of dementia, as well as genre. You'll find a helpful title in just minutes using our search tool. So, after the podcast, take a few moments to visit our bookstore at allsauthors.com/bookstore. Remember, You are not alone.
Hi, Marianne. Great to see you again.
Hey, Christy, welcome back to the All Authors podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited today because we are interviewing one of our management team, Andrea Couture, the author of Embracing What Remains. And she's also an acquisitions editor for us. So maybe that'll be really interesting to talk about with her too, see how she's doing. And I enjoyed talking to Andrea. She's a wonderful writer and has done a lot with Al's Authors, which is terrific. But also, she wrote a very touching memoir about her father. And what I find very interesting in this conversation is what it's like to have a prominent figure in your family who is also, her father was a surgeon, so very active in his community, but also, a position of really helping a lot of other people during difficult times. And then his decline and how that impacted her, impacted him, their whole family. I think this is a really great conversation, and also a lot about how we talk about these things.
Yeah. And her family, they were very brave in being outspoken about the diagnosis and not hiding behind it or trying to hide him from the world. And that really helps a lot of other people see that dementia is a universal. There are no barriers. It can get in anywhere, even people who you would think, gee, he's a surgeon, he's so smart and everything. How did he have dementia? Well, that dementia doesn't care about things like that. So I think it helps people to see that, even the best of us can be affected. It's a universal problem. And the other great thing about her journey is that she was raising very young children at the time. And she talks to us about how she was raising her last child who was, in infancy while her father was declining. And it's just amazing, she said, to watch her child grow as her father was losing his abilities.
Right. Yep. She is one of my peeps. She's part of the sandwich generation, and she was doing all of this at that time. So, yeah. So
she also talked to us about COVID, because COVID was a part of their journey. And that was the first book. I was the one who brought in Andrea's book. I was the acquisitions editor for Andrea. And it was the first book that we had come to All's Authors that took place during the pandemic, because there aren't that many. I think there's only one other one. So that was interesting reading about what was going on, because we kind of know peripherally what life was like for families with dementia during the shutdowns. And the quarantining and all of that. It was very significant, and it's still going on. So Andrea shares with us about that.
Exactly. Really rich conversation. So much to kind of talk about that I think is so important to our communities out there. So great conversation. Really looking forward to it. So
me too.
Let's get to it.
Started.
Yep. Okay, great. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. You are the author of Embracing What Remains, and we are excited to hear more about that and to hear a little bit about it, have you read to us. And I'm excited to have you because you and I are sort of in the same freshman class of the new volunteers at Al's Authors. So I know you do a lot for Al's Authors as well. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So, so let's just jump in. We want to learn more about you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you came to write your book.
Okay. So I am, I guess, first a mom. I have 3 young children ranging in ages from 15 to 7. And 7 years ago, my father was diagnosed with dementia after retiring about 2 years after his retirement as a surgeon. And that same year, I'd actually just had my last baby. And so watching my father go through dementia and then ultimately being diagnosed with Alzheimer's was a really unique experience for me as I was raising my kids, especially my youngest. And I have a background in journalism. I went to St. Michael's College in Vermont. So I've always kind of been a writer, never done it as a career, but I've always journaled. And after my dad was diagnosed, I started writing and journaling about it. And eventually during COVID, I just wanted to turn it into a book and a memoir. And so that sort of led me to write the story and, tell the world about everything that was going on with my family.
Yeah. I so understand that. And the whole thing of raising kids at the same time, really hard.
So there's a book about, it's an older book, it's not in the Alzheimer's collection. It was published like decades ago on that situation called The House on Beertown Road by Elizabeth Cohen.
Okay.
And it was about a woman who had her dad living with her. He had dementia and she had a toddler. And she was, making the observations that as her child was gaining its, cognitive abilities and skills, the father's were declining.
Right.
And it's just like amazing to see that, to see how eventually the two met on a very similar plane. They got along great and they enjoyed each other immensely.
Yeah. The same thing happened in my family. That? Yes. My father connected with my youngest, it seemed the most. And it was almost like the child he didn't even really ever know, but he had this fondness for him. And it was actually really beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
Hard times and, lots going on. So now you've written this book and tell us, I know you do a lot of book events. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're sharing your work and how you're getting it out there?
Sure. So, at first I joined All's Authors, as you guys know, but that was actually one of my goals right after publishing my book. I started looking into other, authors like me, and I found our group and it really inspired me. And I thought that, my book sort of had a cause, had a mission, and All's Authors really fulfilled that as well. So I wanted to become a part of our group. And so that was the sort of like the jumping off for me. And then I just kind of dove into social media and I started doing other podcasts and interviews. I did a live event at St. Michael's at my alma mater that was geared towards Alzheimer's education for the community. And it brought in a neurology professor from the school and also an advocate from the Alzheimer's Association of Vermont. And we sat on a panel and we talked about our experiences. And that was really great to connect with the community and, other people who were affected by Alzheimer's and just to join together, to spread that. And I just, I give away my book a lot to sort of just the people that might be in need or are interested in reading it. I just do a little bit here and there, but it sort of starts to like web and spread. And so it's nice.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah. It's amazing how people do respond to hearing memoir and hearing how it was for you and what lessons you learned. And then people sort of pick up on that and it's so comforting. It's really great. It's really great.
Yeah. People want to know that somebody else made it through. They survived and thrived. Because in the middle of it, you think it's never going to end, and you're so changed, and your life is changed by this experience.
Yeah, and I will say the other thing I noticed too is even people who have read it that may not have a direct connection to Alzheimer's, they may have a connection though to caregiving or to just, taking care of a parent no matter what. Or, small children or the stress of, an illness in their family. And so somewhere along the line, everyone that reads it seems to be able to connect with it, which is also really nice because that means it's sort of like going beyond, even what I first hoped for. So.
Right.
That's the power of memoir too. People can explore other lives.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they do in fiction, but it's a little more personal.
It is, for sure.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with your dad, and what were some of the things that you highlight in your book that were, that stand out for you as being little milestones, or the things that I think moved you the most in rewriting about them or putting them in there?
I think for me, because I live so close to my parents, I live only about a half an hour drive. And so I witnessed a lot of my father's decline. It wasn't like every couple months I saw him. It was probably every week. And so I think just witnessing him first lose his ability to speak was a really interesting time, because my dad was very verbal. He was very verbose in his career and as a man. And so to lose that form of communication when it was basically, just became like a hello or a smile towards the end. And just watching him lose a lot of skills that went beyond his mental capabilities. It was a lot of physical skills he was losing. And I really must say that was the hardest thing to witness for him, was to lose that independency. And yeah, so a lot of things stood out in my mind, just simple things like he couldn't hang his coat on a hanger. And I wrote about that in the day that he admitted that he couldn't do it. That's a huge thing to probably hit his pride, and for him to tell me that he couldn't do it. And that's after this very successful career as a surgeon. I mean, it's just like, it was so shocking to me. I had to write about it. I had to share that because it was almost unbelievable, I
wanted to ask you about that because, your dad's situation, he was a very visible member of the community.
Yeah.
And not, like your average citizen who can kind of like go behind closed doors, and people, I'm not gonna say that they don't notice, but they're just not as visible.
Right.
Like a surgeon in a small town. So how did that affect you on the journey as well, with where he was so well known and trying to respect and protect his legacy, I suppose?
I think that was one of the most difficult things my family faced in the beginning of his diagnosis, was how do we navigate his life now, or our life, with this diagnosis without embarrassing him? And how do you have to somehow, so one of the things I write about in the book too is a few months after my dad's diagnosis, he received an award for his career, and he wanted to speak at it. And we were all sort of like, oh my gosh, like, are we going to tell people like he has dementia? He was really starting to decline at that point too, cognitively. And so our family decided for a while not to tell anybody. He didn't want to tell anybody, but then it became, as he started to decline and almost maybe not understand it himself, that we start to share it slowly with people. And I think once my mom got a lot of wonderful feedback and like respect about it, it didn't seem as shocking or as embarrassing as maybe we thought it was going to be. I mean, it was a really difficult time because he had retired. There was this huge shift. My parents moved from Chicago to New Hampshire. And also, my dad was suffering a disease that was going to affect his mind. And I don't know, it was just, it was a hard time. But
stigma.
It's so hard. And I really feel how difficult this was for your family. I can hear you talking about it. And it's such a, being a really prominent member of our community, but also like a really outstanding kind of career, right? Being a surgeon, and how that impacts you, your status, how you feel, and then, to the next point.
Well, right. And I think, my dad also, he was known on an international level. He had, and so it was, how do we share this with the world in a respectful way? Because surprisingly, my mother, as private as she was, she wanted people to know, because she said, this is a story we should share because this is happening and no one's talking about it. She said, I honestly don't know another surgeon who's retired that had Alzheimer's because they never told anybody. And she said, I think we should be telling people. And it actually ended up being a really positive experience to share the story. I think it opened up doors for other surgeons or doctors to feel comfortable admitting it.
Mm-hmm. Well, for sure. I mean, and prominent, successful, powerful people do have, may eventually develop it. Ronald Reagan, I mean, President of the United States.
Exactly.
So, wow, I really commend your mom for that. How did you feel when she said that? What was going on for you?
I was really proud of her. I was shocked, honestly, because I was like, really? And that really propelled me to then finish writing the book, or to even consider it a book more than just my own writing for myself. It was, well, this is how we can do it. And she was all about it. She said, go for it. You know,
that's great.
Mm-hmm. It was.
What a service.
Mm-hmm. We have several authors and Alz authors that are retired physicians with dementia.
Really? Mm-hmm. That's nice to hear.
Daniel Gibbs and Jennifer Butte, they're like top of mind.
Yeah. So they're getting out there and telling people it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very valuable.
Were there signs early on, like were there things that led to him retiring? Were there things that, or was that just a natural, hey, I'm at that place, I want to retire? And then
I don't think.
Yeah, how old was he when he retired?
He was 65. Which was always a plan. He wanted to retire at 65. And so he did, but it like happened sort of abruptly. Like he said to my mom, okay, I'm retiring next month. And she was like, oh, okay, for sure. Okay. And then I think there was probably subtle cues that no one picked up on. But my mom, looking back, will say, well, I may have gotten a phone call once I was confused, but it was the middle of the night. So, he's in his 60s. That can happen. There was a lot of just like, but nothing. I think my dad, honestly, was so aware at some point that he stopped himself because he knew this could be detrimental. And I know that because he stopped driving because he said, this isn't safe for me. Like, he made those decisions. And I have a feeling that played into his career ending as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know we're never going to know for sure. But anyways, subtle cues, though, when he did retire, was he eventually admitted to my mom he couldn't tell time on his watch anymore. That was the biggest thing, was I don't know how to read my watch. And it was, an analog. It was, not digital. And so that clued my mom in, like, maybe we need to go talk to somebody about this, and my dad agreed, which was also a huge shock because my dad never went to the doctor, They don't do that.
So common for doctors.
Right.
Yeah. Did he go to a doctor he knew, like a friend or like a trusted colleague? Or he just...
For his diagnosis?
Yeah.
No. So my parents moved to New Hampshire and my mom got a PCP here and she started seeing him. And I think my dad liked him and he trusted him, but he had only known him for a few years. And that's who they ended up going to for the initial diagnosis. Mm-hmm. But it was not a friend or a colleague from the past. It was a new person. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's why he felt more comfortable was,
Yeah. Jennifer Butte told us that when she raised her concerns to her physician, he didn't want to hear about it and told her not to worry. There's nothing wrong with her because he was like a friend.
Wow.
Yeah. And that like really delayed her getting a diagnosis.
That's interesting.
She eventually had to do something else, but she knew herself and she knew that as a physician, she can't practice. We have nurses and Alz authors too that had to give up their nursing practice because of symptoms of dementia and stuff. And that they, they figured it out on their own. They knew that they couldn't continue caring for others in such a way that you could cause great harm.
Right.
And step back.
Yeah. So they notice. I mean, people know. So that's,
yeah. I mean, you could, like kill somebody.
Yeah. Especially with my dad being in an operating room. I mean, that's risky,
right. And I think a lot of surgeons retire early too, or they cut back on their practice because of the physical demands. Like, people don't realize how physical it is because you're on your feet for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, my dad suffered.
You don't move around much when you're doing that, and you can't just take a break and stop in the middle.
Right.
I'm so impressed with how all of you you and your mom handled this, and just wanting to put the word out, because I'm sure this opens the door for other people to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to bring up, your book, when I read it, when was it, in 2022 that I came
2021
out?
probably.
In 21. So yours was the first book that I read that mentioned COVID as a factor in the caregiving journey. We hadn't encountered that situation yet in the writing. So could you talk a little bit about that, what it was like to care for your dad during COVID?
Yeah. So one thing I want to mention is my dad actually never went into a care facility. So he stayed in my parents' home for the entirety of his disease. And so COVID threw a real wrench in having caregivers come to the house. And it was twofold, because we were afraid my dad would get COVID, but we were actually more afraid that my mother would get COVID because she has an autoimmune disease and she couldn't get vaccinated for it. So we were constantly on edge of, is a caregiver going to show up today? And are they going to be willing to wear a mask? And then, sometimes they would get COVID themselves and they'd have to bail out. So it was this constant, like, who's going to take care of dad? Who's going to help mom? Does she have someone overnight? It was like really stressful, on top of trying to manage it, for myself, with my kids, in my own home. And then it was like, well, we can't take dad to the doctor because he can't really go. So there was just a lot of, and then it was like this question of, do we go there and spend time because we know time is limited and time is short, or do we stay home and, worry about physical health rather than everyone's mental and emotional health of being together? And then when you're trying to FaceTime with a person who has dementia or Alzheimer's, it's very complicated. I thought my dad was confused most of the time because my sisters and I have two sisters. We'd all get on FaceTime together. And my dad was probably like, I don't know what's happening. I hear three voices. They're all the same. It just added this level of complication that I almost felt was just unfair to our journey. Though as time progressed, I realized it was actually a blessing, because I realized my dad was not missing out on anything in life because nobody was doing anything. Nobody was going anywhere. And it ended up probably being good timing.
Wow.
It was just really interesting, all of it.
Yeah. That's a really interesting perspective, mm-hmm. But I imagine it's so hard I can't even imagine doing Zoom with someone who's progressing in their disease and having them.
Yeah. The other really interesting part of it was, and I also write about my book, is because my dad was a surgeon, he spent many hours of his life behind a mask and looking at other people wearing masks. And so here we are wearing masks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this comforting to him or is this confusing him? Because he's like, am I in an operating room? Because at times he would be in a hospital bed in his bedroom and we would be over him, cleaning him up or getting him dressed, looking like probably nurses or, and it was just like, what is going on? This is so crazy,
Yeah. Did he ever mention that? Did he ever say, where am I? What's going on? How many nurses do I have?
He never said a word.
Wow.
It was so weird.
That's definitely an interesting thing, right?
It was just another weird layer to this whole thing,
And probably he wasn't as freaked out as many people are. Like, what are you doing with a mask on? It's like, masks, okay.
Right. He was used to it, so I don't know.
And COVID continues to be a problem for caregivers and people who have loved ones in care. My brother's in a place now, and I hadn't seen him in over a year, and he's up in Mass, up in northern Mass.
Yeah.
And I was like, I went up to New Hampshire, and I said, I'm gonna go visit him, and he called me and he said, don't come. They shut everything down because they have COVID. And that was like earlier this summer.
Wow.
So it's still a problem now with these shutdowns. And I think there's been like one more there since then, which, it happens frequently. So people are still being impacted by that.
Yeah.
Andrea, would you like to read to us from your book? We'd love to hear a piece.
Yes. I'm going to read a little passage that actually is about the first time my dad saw me wearing a mask. Okay. And so I've just arrived at the house and I walked in. And so here we go. Hi, Dad, I'm here, I said, smiling behind my mask. He got up and walked to me and stood close. He said, "What have you been doing?" Did he question my mask? Did he think I was someone else? Did he think he was back in the operating room? I said, "I know this is silly, but I need to wear it so you and Mom don't get sick." He didn't respond. He didn't ask any questions. I didn't want him to think he was sick, but rather that I was protecting him. A silver lining, one silver lining, was that while we all had to wear masks around a potentially confused dementia patient, my father was most likely a pro at seeing people with masks and learning to communicate behind them. Maybe being a surgeon made all of this not so strange.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
So that day was okay. I actually ended up pulling down my mask at one point and just smiling. And then I pulled it back up because I wanted him to see my face and to, maybe hopefully recognize me. But I think he knew who I was, or at least recognize, my face. But what a time to be alive.
Yeah. People recognize us in many different ways that are not always the visual. They know our voice.
That's true.
They can smell us. They know how they feel around us.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I just read that somewhere that was like, they may not know your name or even who you are in their life, but they know how you make them feel. I just really like that.
They know that they love you.
Yeah.
And I think that's really profound when people experience that. They know that they love you, that you're somebody they love. And so it doesn't necessarily really matter if they don't know your name.
Yeah.
Whether you're the daughter.
At the end of, nearing the very end of my, actually, this happened just before my mother died. And she was in assisted living, and my brother and his oldest son came out, and my nephew at the time was probably very early 30s or very late 20s. And they lived in Michigan. My mom and dad were here in California where I live. And so she hadn't seen him in a long time. And my brother said, "Hi, Mom." And she knew him. And he said, "I brought somebody." And Michael said hello. And my brother said, "Do you remember?" And because we were doing this, we were not pros at Alzheimer's yet. And my mom said, "No, but I know I love you." It was just so beautiful.
That is
so beautiful. He said, it's perfect, but yeah. So much.
It's like Maya Angelou says, people never forget how you make them feel.
Right. It's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Important. Did you want to read another excerpt?
Okay. Just a few weeks before my father's PET scan, Jacob had an evening concert at his school, and he played the saxophone as part of the 4th grade band. My parents had planned to get a ride down from a hired driver, come to the concert, and then head home. An hour before the concert, my mother called me with guilt, saying, "I can't believe I did this, but I scheduled the ride for the wrong day. We won't be able to make it. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry." My heart hurt for my mother, who sounded so sad on the phone, and mostly for Jacob. She wasn't a fan of driving at night anymore, especially on a highway, so I knew their only option to come down at that point was if she drove, and that wasn't going to happen. Jacob was so upset when I broke the news to him as we put on our coats to leave. What? What do you mean? Why can't Papa just drive Gigi down?" he said, holding back his tears, referencing the loving names for his grandparents. "Because he can't. I'm sorry," I said solemnly. My children still hadn't been told what was going on with my father. They were young, and dementia was a difficult disease to explain to a child. But why? Jacob kept badgering. I kept responding, he just can't. He can't drive anymore. I finally broke into tears and shouted so he would stop asking. My heart was heavy, my head hurt, and it just wasn't fair. I knew I had to eventually tell Jacob what was going on, and maybe the PET scan would help explain further, so I could do that. Yeah, that was a rough, yeah.
How did you finally talk to the kids about it?
So after my dad was officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or as official as you can get, which was about a month later after this, I sat them both down because at the time, Henry, my youngest, was only a couple months or a year, so I wasn't going to tell him. And Hannah and Jacob were maybe 5 and 8. And I said, so Papa has a disease. I said, he has Alzheimer's. And Hannah said, what's that? And I said, his brain, I said, he has a disease in his brain, so it's going to make it hard for him to remember things. And Jacob piped up right away and said, oh, I know what that is. And I said, you do? And he said, yeah, my teacher's mom has it, and sometimes she talks to us about it. And so he already kind of knew. And that was sort of the way we handled it.
Wow.
And I don't think Hannah really ever understood, in the beginning. And then Jacob sort of did. And I think he did the best with it, he was really gentle with my dad, and it was really kind of beautiful to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever talk to the teacher about it or?
Yeah. So I put that in my book.
Yeah.
And before I published it, I wrote to her and I said, is it okay that I share this little, story? And she said, absolutely. And she was so honored. And actually my son and her still communicate. He's a sophomore in high school, and they still will email or, write letters to each other. And they just have this connection now, this bond. And I think she was really kind of touched by it, that she made such a difference for our family. Just that little thing that she was doing was enough to help out,
Right. Well, and it speaks to, again, how powerful it is when people tell their stories, right? So here's a teacher who shared. And what grade was he in when that happened?
4th.
Yeah.
They were young, yeah.
You have a 4th grade teacher who's, willing to disclose that,
right,
and apparently share it in a way that your son felt safe and not, frightened. Right. But it made him then understand. And the more we can be able to talk about these things and with kindness and real information kind of thing, right, the better. And so beautiful. Yeah, that's great.
That was nice.
So I was going to ask you, living in New Hampshire, how, what were the resources like for you? What was available in your community?
I think that was something that we really struggled with. Even though my dad was in a system, probably the best healthcare system you can have in New Hampshire, it was still lacking in resources and support. My mom felt very much on her own. It was sort of like, here's the diagnosis, and, here's some nursing homes or whatever that he could go to. My mom was like, nope, we're not doing that. And so she really had to do everything on her own. And support groups, my mom was doing one, but she was doing one on the phone with people all over the country. It wasn't in person, first of all, part of it was due to COVID. And the other part was we just didn't have those, resources. Where my parents live is even smaller of a community than where I live. I live very close to Concord, which is the state capital. My parents live more up north where there's really not much going on. And so even healthcare wise was difficult, I wished a lot of times my dad would go to Boston for healthcare, but he chose not to. So it was a struggle, and a lot of piecemealing going on with caregiving and, finding people to help out. It was really every day was like, what's going to happen? you know?
Especially in the rural areas. Was he more like in the North Country, or was it the White Mountains?
No,
Closer to Mass?
it's about an hour and 45 minutes to Boston for my parents or for my mom. So I wouldn't say it's totally rural, but it for most people that are from bigger areas, they would say it is, you know?
Well, the rural states, I think, who don't have a big tax basis end up not being able to offer the kind of services that people require. I think that ends up being a part of the problem. They don't have the resources because they don't have the money.
Yeah. And we're just a small state and we don't really have a huge urban population. And I know my mom won't admit it, but I feel like Chicago would have been maybe a better place for all of this. But I think my parents really liked being here and felt at peace.
Is that where they were from originally? That's where he practiced?
No, Chicago? Mm-hmm. That's where my dad practiced for 24 years, but my parents are both from New England. They're actually from Vermont and Massachusetts. And that's why they came back to New Hampshire, you know, to retire was partly because I was here, but also they had New England roots. And this is what they always wanted to do.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of people are like attracted to some of these more rural areas because the taxes are low and the houses are, you know, real estate is a lot cheaper. And I used to observe this a lot in my nursing practices. People would retire and they'd move south because I'm in New York. So everybody wants to go down south. And then, you know, years later or so, they'd start trickling back because they couldn't get the services that they need. That's when you don't have a high tax base, then you don't have money for things like daycare programs and nursing homes and home care places and county care and stuff. You know, it doesn't exist like it does here because people would say, you know, they knew that I was rich in resources in New York State. They would come back. And then, of course, their family was still here. And they didn't realize when they decided they were going down to Florida or down the Carolinas that they would really need the presence of their children and their grandchildren in their lives, siblings and stuff. You know, it's like, you have to be realistic when you uproot your life like that, especially if you have a family history. And then it becomes a reality that this could be my situation. And you have to prepare for it.
I don't think my parents, I think they probably considered it, but didn't think it would be so hard to find care. Now, I think if my mom had decided to place my dad in a nursing home or assisted living or a place for him, it would have been okay. It would have been easy to find around here, but she didn't want to do that. And so that's where the challenge came in.
Yeah.
And my mom has monetary resources, but if the people aren't there, what can you do? You know,
Exactly.
It was getting interesting after a while, you know, like we were putting ads in the local paper looking for people. And thank God we found some really amazing caregivers though. Like a lot of them were private hires and they were really, really good. Like we got really lucky.
Yeah. We did that with my mom. My mom I bent over backwards trying to get my mom all the resources I could get. And she didn't have dementia. She had a lot of other health problems. And I even took my concerns to the top person in Massachusetts in the healthcare system and was able to get my mother 24/7 care at home with Medicaid. And it only lasted for a week or so because she ended up going into hospice care. And then when she left there, and long story short, she ended up going home with my brother. He lived in a different county than my mom did. And when we applied to that county to get the services, they said she didn't need any services at all in their estimation. So, you know, it just moved a few miles. Yeah. It's just a few miles, like 15 miles away. And now all of a sudden we're like back at square one with nothing and no recourse. So that was really rough, but that's how these disparities are. And people I don't think nobody realizes it until they have to access them.
Are there other things that you have found along your journey as an author and talking about this and then becoming more involved with Al's authors that, I don't know, make you think back on this time period with your dad that you think about differently or something you think, I don't know, like you've become more of an expert now in the whole process. And when you think back, are there any insights that you see or things that you would want to share with folks?
I think for me, I wish I had shared my dad's diagnosis more publicly earlier on. I think I needed the support and I didn't really have it. And now I'm getting it, which is awesome. But my dad is gone now. And so it's not applicable to dealing with him anymore. It's dealing with the grief and, following the disease, which is good too. But I think, the place I was at in my life, trying to raise, my kids and the small little baby and dealing with, my dad and processing grief and everything. I wish I had more people, more peers to talk to about it. That's one thing I wish. And I think if I'd shared more publicly, I would have had a little bit of support, but I chose not to. Not to say that the book didn't come out while he was still alive, because it did, but through some of the harder times, I hadn't published the book yet. And so my friends were great, but they didn't really have that connection. They didn't really understand. A lot of my friends, their parents still care for their kids. They're not, I was caring for my parents. And so I felt really alone. And I think that's something that's so important when you have a family member or a loved one with dementia or Alzheimer's. It's like you need support and you need to seek it out. And I think that's one of the biggest things, because nobody wants to be alone or feel alone. And I think that's where it gets really kind of scary,
Yeah. That's really important. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you published the book before your dad died.
I did.
And so how long has it been since your dad passed away?
So I published the book in June of 2021, and my dad passed away in May of 2022. And it's funny because when I went to edit the book and I brought it to an editor who was a memoir editor, she said, I think you should end the book before he dies. I don't want you to wait to finish this book. She said, your book can be just as powerful without your father passing away. And I said, okay. And she was right. Like, I did end the book before he passed away. And I still think I got a lot of my points across, and, so he died a little bit less than a year after I published it. So it's been, I think 18 months since he died.
Wow.
So.
And how's your mom?
She's actually doing okay. I mean, this is a huge life change for her. So she had caregivers living with them for, I want to say, almost 2 years. And so now she's alone. She does sort of have someone that helps her still, because she battles a couple of her own issues. But, she doesn't have my dad around. And I just think that I think she's finding her way. She's like, okay, so retirement wasn't going to be with my husband. Well, it was for a couple of years, but not in the capacity she thought. And so she is slowly finding her way, to this new life. But I would say in general, my mom is actually doing really well.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
That's great.
It's a lot.
And you recently published your book in audio. I know that you had recorded that yourself. What was that like?
Yeah, so when I first wrote my book and published it, I had said to myself, I really want to do an audiobook someday. And it was a long-term goal. And last summer, I actually did a Zoom call with Alzheimer's Association of Vermont, and they had me read a passage. And a couple of the caregivers said, you should turn this into an audiobook. First of all, we like your voice. And secondly, we don't have time to read books, but we could listen to books. And I said, you know what? That's the final push for me. I'm going to do it. You guys have really sort of inspired me to get this done. And so last summer, I looked up online who's got recording studios near me, which I'm in Little New Hampshire. So I actually ended up going down to Arlington, Massachusetts, into a recording studio with audiobook professionals. And I did it for 4 days. And I went back for a 5th day for editing. And I read it myself. And I absolutely loved the process. I feel like 2 years after publishing it was such a different, and my dad's gone now. He's passed away. So just to read the story again, to get back those feelings and everything was really powerful. And I'm glad that I waited. to do it. I felt like it was a whole new experience for me.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. That is so powerful. I so agree. And having been a parent raising kids, that's busy enough. And then you add in the caregiving piece, it's a lot. So audiobooks are perfect. Do you feel another book inside of you that's wanting to, are you doing more writing? And what is it in the same area, or are you trying your skills in another area?
I'm sort of doing both. So I kept writing after my dad passed away, or after I finished the first book. But it became more of like little vignettes, it wasn't so much of this flow of a novel, the way Embracing What Remains is. So I actually have about 25,000 words that I could publish that are almost like a sequel to the book, which follow my dad's life through the last 2 years of last year of his life. But I have to say, I'm feeling a little vulnerable about it for a couple of reasons. I think, when you write your first book and publish it, you're just like, okay, great. Whatever happens, happens. But now it's like a little bit of pressure. Like, I want to make sure this one's just as good. It is told a little differently. And also it becomes a lot more private. There's a lot more intimate moments shared. And I don't know if I'm ready to do that. Like the first one, I have my mom's permission to do it. She's like, go for it. It's fine. But I'm like, I don't know if I want to. I'm a little anxious about that, but I have been writing. And then I'm also writing a fiction book, which is a whole new world for me. So I don't know if that's ever going to come out, but I'm trying.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's great.
That's great. And I do want to mention that you are going to be hosting our new book club with Aging and Amazing that starts up in January.
Yes.
We have our first book club meeting right at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? What's that going to be like?
Well, I think, once a month, the book club, which is online, is going to have a book from all authors that is either going to be chosen by the book club or nominated sort of from all authors that we think might be a good read. And, the group will read it, and then we'll meet online and discuss it. And the author will actually be profiled as well and come on the show or in the club. And, they can be there for questions or give a little feedback on their book and how that whole process went. I think it's going to prove to just be a really nice community discussion, that the books will sort of be the, jumping point, and that it will just, be a great way to communicate with other people who are caregivers or who have dementia or Alzheimer's themselves. So hopefully, is a couple, cool things for people to read a book and then also like meet the author and who has real life experience most of the time with this, so.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That'll be very exciting.
Yeah. So our first meeting is going to be on Tuesday, January 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Right.
And you're going to be the first author, right? We're going to read your book.
I am, yes.
So that people can get to know you in the group. And Aging and Amazing is a online community of people who, are interested in issues of aging and want to live amazing lives. And unfortunately, All Authors is involved because dementia is a part of aging for many people, whether they're caregivers or they have the disease themselves. It's not a natural part of aging. It doesn't affect everybody, but it's enough that we needed to have a space for that. So that's how we're involved in that. So people can check that out and join the community if they want. And so we're doing your book in January. And then in February, who are we doing? Is it Flory?
Yeah.
Flory Munat, Be Brave.
Yep. And then March is Ruth Stevens.
Yeah.
And her book, Stage 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then
in April, we're doing the poetry book, right?
Right. A couple poets. Yeah. We're going to have a couple poets and their books.
Yes, because it's Poetry Month. Storms of the Inland Sea, Margaret Stowall's book.
Oh, lovely.
Poetry. So, yeah. So, and speaking of poetry, we're in the process of publishing our poetry anthology from our poetry event that we did last April. hopefully that'll be out after the holidays. I'm working on that myself. So we hope to get that out there. And poetry is a wonderful means of expression for people on a dementia journey, whether they're caring for someone or they have that themselves. There are some phenomenal poets with dementia writing right now. You could check out, and some of them are in Al's authors. Some of them are in Al's authors. So you can just search poetry and you'll find them.
So, Andrea, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we close up? Any other things you have coming up? That Aging and Amazing sounds amazing.
We're excited.
Thank you so much for taking time to be with us. This has been lovely.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to finally get you on board, because I thought somehow I had thought that you had already been on the podcast being a member of our team. We tried to bring all the team members on so that people can get to know them better. And I was looking to see, like, when was Andrea on? And like, she wasn't on.
Nope.
That's why we said, we got to get her. We got to get her quick. She's going to come up soon, because we want to make sure people can at least listen to the interviews with the people that are running the show. So Andrea, I just want to point out, is one of our acquisitions editors. So what that means is when the books come in through our submission portal, they get assigned to somebody who has an interest in that particular title, and then that person reads, communicates with the author, evaluates the book before asking for a review copy, gets the copy, reads the book, goes over everything with the author before we accept it in the collection. So we accept about 60% of the books that come our way. Yep. It's a very stringent process. So it's not easy to get your book in. And then she's taken on the Aging and Amazing Book Club. So we're really excited about that and grateful and appreciative of your time and talent.
Thank you. I'm excited to do these things and to help out. It's a nice way to give back and sort of continue sharing my dad's story and also his legacy too, which was to help educate people medically. And though I'm not medical, I feel like I'm still helping, spread some awareness about medical disease. And I feel like that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
The whole care piece is huge. People, that's what the message that we get the most is people, once they get a diagnosis, that they're not given any guidance or any instructions, and they're left to figure it out on their own. Right. And, so many people have already figured it out and they want to share it. So that's what we are. We're the repository for all of that. Right. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an Al's Authors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on Al's Authors, please visit alsauthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to allsauthors@gmail.com. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, totally reliant on donations to do what we do. If our authors' stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.
Hi, I'm Susan of Al's Authors. When I was a caregiver for my mother with dementia, resources to educate and offer support were hard to come by. Al's Authors believes in the power of storytelling to support and encourage those impacted by Alzheimer's and dementia. Custom Caregiver Collections is a customized collection of memoirs, novels, caregiver guides, children's books, and more. This collection of well-vetted books comes displayed in a beautifully crafted wooden tabletop bookshelf with Al's Authors branding. Custom Caregiver Collections supports our goal of bringing real books to real people in real places and are perfectly suited for senior care communities, senior centers, doctor's offices, memory cafes, and professional or personal libraries. If you or your organization is interested in ordering or building a custom caregiver collection, we can guide you through choices of books written in many categories to support your needs. Want to build your own book collection? Contact us at alzauthors.com/ccc to get started.